Hey everybody, welcome back. This is, we're winding down the R1200 GS teardown, and this one's gonna be a little bit talky, a little bit like the introduction was. We've got George back in the studio.
Hello.
And by studio, I mean shop. We've got George's attention on a relatively slow day. We're gonna talk a little bit about what we did to the bike and what we might be able to do with the leftover parts. How long you figure it took me to take that bike apart, George? If I strung it all together in consecutive hours instead of over several weeks?
I'd say you're probably at 10 hours.
10 hours?
Thereabout.
How fast could you have done it?
Probably 7. It depends. If you're going to tear it apart with just the, I'm going to tear this apart and parts will fall all over the place and I don't care, you'd probably get it done in 2 or 3. But if you're trying to tear it down with the intent of having salvageable parts when they're done, it definitely takes longer. And labeling things where they came from, keeping screws with subparts is also more time consuming than just throwing them all in a bucket and saying, big tub of parts.
And I definitely went for the fasteners in a can approach and didn't keep them with the assemblies and all that kind of stuff. So I want to talk about the parts that we have now from the bike. Obviously, I'm gonna tear the transmission and the engine apart. So we're not trying to sell the engine or the transmission, with both have 94,000 miles on them, which kind of negates their value to anybody except somebody who blows an engine on a trip and has to get that bike back home for whatever reason. If we hung on to the engine, we could pop it in their bike and they could get back home.
You got one on the shelf right up there.
Yeah, and we've already got one.
Transmissions too.
So we're not gonna need to do that. So I wanna talk about 2 qualities of parts. Quality might not be the right word. Parts that we should hang on to as a working shop and parts that we could reasonably try to sell. The value doesn't matter, but parts that might be useful enough to somebody else with a similar bike, an 05 to 07 R1200 GS, that they could use them if they had a crash, if they had a minor failure, if they had rust, take out their whatever. So let's focus on the first part first. What parts should we hang on to in the shop to keep for emergencies for customers that might come in off the road with a problem?
From this era, I like to keep as many ignition coils on hand as possible. They're a chronic failure point. They're round about a couple $100 a piece.
And there's 4 of them.
And there's 4 of them. They come very handy to diagnose a bike. If you have a known good coil, you snap it in, problem goes away, you found the problem. I would also keep all the hardware because it is very convenient to have a pile of hardware. It's more convenient if it's well sorted, organized, and you know what bolts are where, but who's got time for that?
So when you say hardware, you mean all the nuts and bolts and Torx things and hex things and all of the stuff that fastens one thing to another?
Correct. Nuts, bolts, washers, screws, clips. No zip ties.
No zip tie. We do not need to keep the zip ties, although there are lots of those. Ignition coils, hardware, obviously. That's actually, once you said it, that's completely obvious because you never know who's going to come in with a rusted screw or a stripped out head or whatever. What else would we be well advised to keep and stick on a shelf and hang on to?
Valve covers, some of the sensors, knock sensors occasionally go bad. Hull sensor, which I guess isn't a hull sensor anymore on this, it's a crank sensor and a cam sensor on this model.
Well, tell you what, I will just write down sensors and not qualify them, and that'll help us.
I would also keep the starter because, again, they go bad. Although I have several of them on the shelf, so in this case, we don't actually need it.
Right.
But if you were just starting out in this, if you didn't already have a stockpile of parts, those are the things I would go for.
What about the alternator? Because I know the alternator still worked.
Probably not. There are 3 or 4 different versions depending on the year, different connectors. And they're very difficult to get to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, they are. I mean, not now.
not now. But with the bike assembled, it's several hours to go through. And again, at 100,000 miles, we're not going to put this on anybody's bike. Now, somebody comes through that needs one from, I think this only goes up to '06, maybe '07, not very likely that somebody's going to come through and need this.
Right. And that would
I already have one.
and that would be the kind of thing where we put it on their bike so they can get home.
Right.
And recommend that they replace it with something new or remanufactured at least.
But given the time restraints it takes to get to it and swap it out, you've really got to be in a bad way to need a 100,000-mile alternator.
Yeah. All right. So anything else you can think of that we should hang on to be able to help our people?
Not really. I mean, these bikes are getting so few and far between now, and that's crazy to me that it's only an '05.
Yeah.
There's definitely some parts that I'm interested in for projects on later down the road, but.
So tell me about some of those parts that you're thinking we should hang on to for projects.
Well, if you've seen what I just did with a 1150 GS, I put a 1100R telelever on it.
Right.
And had we had this bike all the way apart, I probably would have used this telelever and the front end on that bike.
Yeah. We'd have to check the forks to make sure they're not damaged because the bike did crash.
True.
And the front wheel took a lot of damage, so there could be fork damage in there. Beyond that, what should we reasonably be thinking that we might be able to sell now that we've got the whole bike disassembled? I'm thinking things starting with basic things like the seats.
Yeah.
That had aftermarket seats on it that were in really good condition. I don't know where I put them. The muffler was an nice Akrapovic muffler, high mount. So that is something that somebody could conceivably want to buy. The things that you put your stuff into are called saddlebags, the nice big aluminum saddlebags. So what else could we reasonably think that we might be able to sell from this bike?
Usually anything front end wise.
Gotcha.
I'm interested in the forks, but if somebody out there on the interweb wants them, certainly give us a call. You'll probably pay more than I'm willing to. And I'm sure another one will come strolling in here eventually.
Yeah.
The front fairing bracket, separate from the frame, main frame, is the front fairing bracket that holds the instrument cluster, the windshield.
Right.
All of those parts that are damaged when you have front end collisions, they sell well. Wiring harness, I'm always a fan of saving uncut, reasonably good condition wiring harnesses because they are a bit time consuming to replace, but even sitting here in 2020, they're about $1,500–$1,600.
Yeah, I actually looked it up there. The one for this bike with ABS is over $1,600.
So that's a pretty healthy chunk of money for something that fits in a small duffel bag.
Yeah.
And there are several different variants of them, and eventually BMW is not going to have them in stock anymore.
Yeah.
So even if you had the money to buy a new one, you wouldn't be able to. So you need to come up with a good harness to replace yours.
Yeah. What about the rear frame and the front frame that have the VIN plates on them? Are those things? I can imagine if somebody was going to build a bike from scratch and with the point of putting a title on it, us having the rear frame, front frame, and the title all together would be conducive to a big project like that. But other than that, they're kind of just scrap metal, aren't they?
Yes. Having been in BMWs for several decades, it pains me to throw out frames with titles. However, I do it quite regularly on the modern stuff. Nobody wants them. By the time you bend up a frame, you've usually done so much damage to the rest of the bike that it's not worth fixing. You can find a good running bike for less money. And unless you've got to have that bike that you bought new back in 2007, and nobody wants it.
No, the front wheel is destroyed. It's got a huge ding in it. The rear wheel is in good shape. So we could sell that if somebody wanted that. But that's another thing that I might be inclined to just put on the rack and keep it here for if one of our customers comes in with a damaged rear wheel, we can turn them around and send them out the door with a good quality used wheel. So how would you make that determination, keep it or sell it?
It's kind of a space versus value thing.
Gotcha.
You know, like the wiring harness, it's relatively, put it down into a 10-gallon tote with room to spare, and it's probably got $200–300 worth of value. A rim is fairly large and might bring 150 bucks on a good day on eBay.
Yeah.
But it's tough. A lot of it is, what do I already have? In this case, I don't have this wheel in this color, so on the shelf it goes. Next one that comes in, I will look at and say, I've already got one of these. This one's in better condition, so
Swap them out.
Swap them out, put the best one on the shelf, other one goes, and you get 20 cents a pound for it. And that kills me.
But taking something that's perfectly functional to the scrapper is difficult.
And you'll sell 10 front wheels for every rear wheel you sell, because people hit stuff with the front wheels.
Right.
They bend more.
What about some of the other sub-assemblies, like the ABS pump or the final drive?
Well, in this case, the final drive we already sold off this.
Yeah, that's true. I knew that. So that's one of
the great parts. You know, if you've got a good final drive, they go very quickly.
Yeah, and that went out to a customer who came in, was in the middle of a trip and needed to get home.
The ABS pump is, I equate ABS pumps to wine. When they're brand new and in the box, they're a sealed bottle of wine, they're fine for decades. Now that that's used and it's got brake fluid in it, you've uncorked it.
Right.
6 months from now, that's going to go in the recycling pile. All that brake fluid in there's not doing the seals any good. It's going to get gummy and junky, and again, it's got 90,000+ miles on it, so who knows how much time it has left. Now that being said, they're $3,500 new. And even though,
really?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Maybe they're $2,600. They're not cheap.
Well, you know what I'll do is I'll look it up and I'll put up in the corner of the video the part number and the
price.
And the MSRP, which
That's Monty Hall.
Yeah, which the last time I looked was astronomical. It's like enough that you draw in a sharp breath.
Yes, you do.
And it certainly is enough to total most of these bikes anyways. If somebody says you need a new ABS pump, your bike is total.
Yeah.
Even though it's good condition, because unless you want to keep it forever. If you're going to keep it for 4 or 5 years, it doesn't matter as long as you're willing to acknowledge that you will never get your money back out of it.
Yeah.
But in, like I said, a few months, that thing is going to be done. It's not going to be worth putting in a bike. No matter how much you drain it, flush clean fluid through it, unless you constantly take it off the shelf, keep flushing fluid through it, hooking it up to a good running bike and making all the internal parts move, something's going to get stuck.
So it's, in that respect, it's not unlike an entire motorcycle that if you use it, it continues to function properly. It's when you stop using it and let it sit that it starts to deteriorate.
Correct. I have had several people bring me bikes from this era that they bought, they used for a couple of years, they put it in the corner of the garage, life gets in the way. Now it's been 10, 11 years since it's run, you turn the key on, ABS goes crazy, and pump's bad.
Yeah.
20,000 miles, everything worked when they put it away, but this era ABS pump, they're finicky. They don't like to be ignored.
So now that we're done with the bulk of the project, and we still have the engine and transmission disassembly to go, but that's going to be another series of videos. Because we have the luxury of space here in the shop to store the 1, 2, 3, 4 tubs of parts that came off of this bike. And it amazes me that we took a whole motorcycle and cut it down into, turn around and see what the capacity on those tubs are. 27 gallons.
27 gallons.
So
you cheated, you already had your glasses on.
That's right. So we basically took a running motorcycle, damaged from the crashing, but running nonetheless, took it apart and stored it in 4 27-gallon totes. Right? That's amazing.
Except the gas tank.
Except the gas tank, which is probably still outside in the trailer because it still stinks like gas.
Yep.
That was fun when I got gas all over the place, wasn't it? That was in February. That was 9 months ago. We have the luxury of space, time to leave the bike up on the lift. For us, breaking down a bike here in the shop is not something that we do all the time, but it wasn't an inconvenience. Mostly not to me, because I wasn't here all the time. You had to move it around sometimes. Couple times. For the average person, the average Joe at home, or Jill at home with their garage and a busted bike, knowing what we went through, would you recommend somebody taking on the task of parting out their own bike?
If you have the time, you want to gain the knowledge, sure. But if you're doing it thinking you're going to make money, you'll probably be sadly disappointed. I like to go on eBay and look at the sold sales and see what from this bike has sold and how much it's brought. And you will be shocked that a lot of stuff doesn't bring very much money, and sometimes you'll see the same part sold 3 or 4 different times for huge ranges. You'll see a valve cover, say, that goes anywhere from $20 to $115, and the $115 one is in the worst condition. That's just luck of the draw.
So you didn't actually answer the question. Would you recommend this to the average Joe or Jill motorcycle rider?
Well, I did.
You equivocated. You didn't say yes or no. Obviously, for us, it's not an inconvenience. We can use a lot of the parts in the shop ourselves. So for us, it's worth it occasionally to buy a wrecked bike or a derelict bike that's, got some catastrophic problem, ABS pump, engine, transmission, whatever, and break it down and sell what we can and use what we can. But for a regular person, I get the feeling you want to not discourage somebody you want to discourage them without saying you want to discourage them.
As I stated clearly before, depends on what you want out of it. If you're looking for profit, there are better ways to make money.
Gotcha.
If you're looking for education, then yeah, take it apart. If you want to know how that bike you put 70, 80,000 miles on works, sure, take it apart. Because it's wonderful to take something apart you never have to put back together. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to remember when you take out those 6 bolts that each one of them is a slightly different length and just where did they come from. You'll also understand why you go to the shop and some things are ridiculously expensive and you go, there's no way that can take 4 hours until you're trying to pull the lock set out of the tail section. You go, my God, this is a pain.
Yeah, which is something I discovered just this morning. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's the answer I was looking for. I was looking for a nice, clear answer. Yeah, I think one of the things that I got the most out of it was learning how all the things go together. And one of the things I wish I'd done different is I wished that I had counted every single zip tie because I'm really curious at this point to know exactly how many zip ties. And I kept almost all of them, but I did, at the beginning, I threw several big handfuls of them away as I was getting the initial parts off the bike. And I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had started keeping them from the beginning because it got to be pretty ridiculous pretty fast. I think with a pair of cutters, a T25 and a T30, you could take apart about 1/3 of this bike. Seriously, I think you could take apart 1/3 of this bike with just those 3 tools.
And a hammer.
And a hammer. Of course, you got to have a hammer. All right, George, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for coming back and checking out what is going to be one of the last videos in the R1200 Teardown series. I've got another one planned to talk to you about paperwork. I have all the paperwork from the 3 previous owners of this motorcycle, so I'm going to do another video to talk a little bit about that. Appreciate your views, your clicks. Please click the like button if you liked the video. Subscribe, comment, ask questions. Come back around. Check out the MOA at bmwmoa.org. And I hope you enjoyed the series on the Teardown. We're going to be doing some other projects next. And if you come back here to Nicked Uber Max, the playlist Nicked Uber Max on the MOA's YouTube channel, you will be the first to see those new project videos. Stay safe, ride fast, don't take too many chances. Now you can say a dirty word.
I wanted to go into George Carlin's